presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and powered by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Welcome to the podcast, where former San Antonio police officer, author, and pastor Tim Rupp walks you through real-life scenarios involving our police officers and digs into the depths of facts and opinions on each case. This is Cop Talk, and it starts now.
Hello and welcome to the Strong Blue Line's Cop Talk. I'm Tim Rupp in the Rev.FM studio in beautiful Idaho Falls. Here with me is station manager Gary Austin. Hello, Gary.
Well, hello, Tim Rupp.
We are just rolling through summer now.
We sure are. It seems like it's flying by.
We were in that meeting today with Pastor Ty, and he mentioned something about preparing for Christmas. Like, come on. Now, and I saw Keri the other day, and when I saw you two, I told her if she needs to practice on the Christmas candy, she can go ahead and practice.
She liked that. Yeah, that made her feel good.
Oh, man, here we are halfway through this year, 6 months.
Yeah.
6/19. 2024.
Yeah.
And halfway through 2020, before we know it, summer will be over. The election will be here.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of exciting stuff come up about the election. There's a sense across America about what's going on with our country.
I agree.
They had just last week, it was revealed that there were 8 terrorists found.
Yeah,
that came
I saw
in
that.
from overseas. Had ISIS ties or something, and they found them, and you just wonder, it's a critical time for America.
It really is.
But as Christians often say, we've read the book, and there's victory in Christ. So
yes,
we're okay.
Yep, the playbook.
Yeah. Yes. And so here we are, June 19th, 2024, and we got some exciting stuff to look at. I want to hear about your trip to Minneapolis area.
Oh, yeah.
But before we do, we're going to look at the Officer Down Memorial page. The officers who were killed in line of duty on this date, we honor their service. We honor their giving of their lives in the line of duty. And so I have Assistant City Marshal A.A. Johnson, Laredo Police Department, Laredo, Texas.
Oh, okay.
Laredo's
You're
down on the border, man.
Yep.
End of watch, June 19th, 1882.
Oh, wow.
So this is right in the middle of the Wild, Wild West days, man, 1882. Yeah. On June 17th, 2 days before, on June 17th, a cook at a Laredo restaurant had quit his job and got into an argument with the owner. The argument escalated and he shot and killed the owner. Marshal Johnson was summoned and responded to the restaurant. Now, this is Laredo, Texas. He was probably the only guy on duty, the marshal.
Yeah.
When I think of marshal in a city, and I'm thinking Matt Dillon. He just
exactly.
Just the town marshal.
Show.
Hey, man, there's a shooting at the restaurant, so he goes.
Right.
He was shot. He was shot through the door when he arrived at the restaurant. So he didn't get inside the restaurant.
Goodness.
They saw him coming from the outside. The bad guy saw him and shot him. He succumbed to his wounds 2 days later on July 19th. The suspect fled and was found near Cotulla. Cotulla's about halfway, a little over halfway between Laredo and San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
So he fled north towards San Antonio. He was found in Cotulla 5 days later, 5 days after the shooting by Texas Rangers. A gunfight ensued and the suspect was shot and killed. 2 Texas Rangers were seriously wounded during the gun battle.
Wow.
So you have an old Western shootout.
It is a Western.
Who shot and killed his boss that fired him.
Mm-hmm.
Who shot and killed the marshal. Then he got in a shootout with Rangers and shot 2 of them, but they shot and killed him.
My goodness.
Here's an interesting thing. Laredo City Council approved $48 for Marshal Johnson's funeral.
Huh.
And $100 for his widow.
Wow.
That's like probably 2-3 months' pay back then.
Yeah, that's true.
So, that's something. That's the first I've ever heard of one of these old, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but at least they gave her something.
Exactly.
To try to get by on.
So interesting.
Huh. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, those are good. I like those older ones too.
Yeah.
So this is Police Officer Tara Christina O'Sullivan, end of watch, June 19th, 2019, from Sacramento Police Department. So police officer Tara O'Sullivan responded to a domestic disturbance, and she was standing in the yard while assisting a woman to retrieve some belongings from a home when a male subject inside the home opened fire with a rifle, actually striking Officer O'Sullivan, which is sad in and of itself. But here, the rest of the story. So the subject, he continued to fire at other officers, preventing them from reaching Officer Sullivan or rendering aid to her. And approximately 30 minutes later, an armored vehicle arrived, and this is when they were able to rescue her, Officer O'Sullivan, from the yard. She was transported to a local hospital, and this is where she passed away at the hospital. The subject remained barricaded inside the home for several more hours while negotiators communicated with him. He surrendered the following morning. So it sounds like this was at early evening of end of watch, June 19th. And so he finally surrendered at 2 a.m. the next morning.
Wow.
He served, she served with the Sacramento Police Department for 6 months.
Wow.
But she previously served as a community service officer and an explorer.
So she was in the Explorer program. So that's kind of like when she was in high school.
Oh, okay.
She was interested in law enforcement.
Ride-alongs.
So they do the ride-alongs. They learn the criminal law, that kind of stuff.
I'll be darned.
So apparently her dream was to be a police officer.
Wow, in 6 months.
6 months. She shot and killed. And she was getting some, so it was this is a common call. Standby, as generally the female in a relationship is getting her belongings, and going to stay somewhere else safe. Taking her to a safe house, taking her to a relative's house or something like that. Standing by while she's get this stuff safe, while she was safe. And the officer protected the life of the gal.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Wow.
Yep. That's
so sad.
Yep.
And then they prevented it, and who knows? It said she was shot in the arm.
Actually doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't.
Doesn't actually say.
Okay.
Yeah.
But she was shot, and who knows where she was shot? She was, she could have died instantly, or she could have been bleeding out, and the officers may have been able to save her if they could have gotten to her.
Yeah.
But they had to wait for the armored car. We talked about armored cars a while back.
Yeah.
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of having armored cars.
Oh, I just can't even imagine being in that situation of not being able to render aid. And
frustrating.
Yeah, frustrating.
Yeah, can't get to a fallen comrade.
No.
Man,
and yet you've got to remain safe, but...
Yeah,
Oh.
Yeah. Wow, that's...
Very frustrating.
That is. Mm-hmm. And when the guy has a rifle, man, that's tough.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and Keri just got back from a business trip, if you will. You were accompanying Keri. She was working while you were out having a good time, man. That's why I heard it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what happened.
So you went to Minneapolis area.
Yeah,
and got to see some sights. So what'd you see while you were there?
Well, we went and we toured the Viking Stadium, the U.S. Bank Stadium. Phenomenal. We've been able to do that some of these places we've gone to, and
cool.
Just enjoy that. It's just
it's kind of neat going into things because you go out there and man, there's huge buildings.
Yeah.
And then you go down there and you realize that football field's still 100 yards long, just like at a high school stadium.
Exactly. Yeah. It is amazing. It's a city in and of itself.
They are,
80,000 people sometimes. And
and they use them for different venues, obviously, concerts and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, but Tim, something that happened that I watched. I watched this kind of unfold, but Keri and I were downtown. We just left a restaurant, and it wasn't quite dark yet, but it was about 8:00 at night. And we were walking on the opposite side of a sidewalk or of a street where this black man had been yelling at 4 officers. There were 2 female officers and 2 male officers. And he was more, when we walked by, he was yelling at the female police officers. And they were standing outside of their vehicle behind their doors. And he called them every single name in the book, just vulgar and mean, and told them that they weren't worth anything, and that he knew that they couldn't touch him, and so, what are you going to do? Wow. And kept egging them on. And the female officers eventually got in their vehicle and backed up. They were backing up. And so this guy was standing at the hood of their car, and as they were backing up, he kept walking to the car. And so they honked their horn, and he just kept coming at him. And so the two other male officers got out of their car and didn't really approach him, but off to the side told him, hey, you are free to go. Just go.
So he just could have walked away.
He could have walked away, and I don't know, but for my mind now, Keri, she was a little bit more nervous. She was like, I think we should go.
Yeah.
Leave the situation. But I could just feel it inside of me. I was just so frustrated for those officers, and I couldn't understand why they weren't doing anything about it. And yet, at the same time, I could also understand. But it was a frustrating situation for me. I just felt so bad for those officers.
And the thing to remember is George Floyd, that was Minneapolis.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's where you were.
Yeah.
And would that a situation happen 4 years ago in 2 months?
Right. Before
George Floyd of May of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And it's disheartening when you tell that story because, for some reason they probably contacted him before you got out because they said you're free to go.
Yeah.
So for some reason they'd contacted him. Maybe there was a report of a suspicious male in the area, or maybe somebody was stealing something and they were just checking on him, or whatever it was. Who knows? But they probably made contact with him, and they found out that he had any warrants or whatever on him and stuff. They're like, okay, you're free to go. Well, he knew that he was going to get arrested, so he starts yelling and screaming and cussing and stuff. And you know what? That I should say that's not acceptable. That should not be accepted in our society. When I was a police officer, now when I first became a police officer, this was back in the early 1980s, and we still arrested people. We'd arrest them for public intoxication if they were intoxicated. We could also make a custodial arrest for disorderly conduct, and disorderly conduct would be using profanity in public. So if somebody uses profanity in public, you used to be able to arrest them for that. That was not acceptable. Well, that's free speech. You know what? There's some things that are improper.
Yeah. And
just like on TV, right? There's still on network TV. There's certain words that you can't say on TV. But when we let go of all restraints and let people to themselves to do whatever they want to do, they push it. It doesn't matter. They always push it more and more and more. An example of this is if you have a bunch of kids in a playground, and let's say you get some like that, a police caution tape. Let's say it's something like our construction tape.
Okay.
And you make a big circle for them playing, like, okay, you guys can play in this, but you can't go outside of this circle. Where do they naturally go? Right to the edge.
Yeah.
And they try to, why? It's in our nature to do that.
That's true.
And if we remove them boundaries, we keep on moving them. And that's what we're doing with society. We keep on moving the boundaries. Well, you can say whatever you want. You can do, when is it going to come to a stop?
I know. And that's what I think too, Tim. Same thing with teachers. It's,
exactly. My wife, Sherry, she worked in a public high school here in conservative Idaho. And she would tell me the things that the high school kids would say to teachers.
Man.
And just disrespecting authority. And just not going to class. They don't want to go to class.
Right.
It's like, oh my goodness.
And where does that come from? Because that was my initial thought as I thought, where does this come from? It could be from, society in and of itself, the whole George Floyd thing, and so people feel like they can do it. But I wonder about the parents.
Well, it's not something that happened overnight.
No, you're right.
Because you look back, back at America in the 1940s and 50s, right after the war. Now, you and I weren't around then.
Right.
But we look back and we know people. Our parents were around then. We can talk to them. Mm-hmm. You did not disrespect the police.
No.
Now, granted, did police officers do things, especially in the South with all the civil rights violations? Yes.
Right.
Yes, right. Absolutely. That stuff was wrong, not making any excuses for it whatsoever. It was a tough time going through the 60s with Martin Luther King. But Martin Luther King Jr., he wanted peaceful protest.
Mm-hmm.
He said, we will protest, but we will protest peacefully. We will have a right to be in a certain place, and we will go there and let you know we're going to be there and we're going to sit there. We have a right. You come to arrest us, you can arrest us because we're not moving, but we're not going to fight you. Mm-hmm. We're not going to throw bricks at you. We're not going to shoot you. We're not going to yell and scream and curse you. We're going to peacefully protest. And he got his point across. And major things were changed during his lifetime, and because of them protests, the civil rights movements in 1964 and all that going on. So there's a way, and I believe there's a proper way to protest against the government. It's in our Bill of Rights that we have a right to peacefully assemble. We have the right to freedom of speech. And we're given that right because England didn't have the right to speak against the king.
Sure.
You said something bad against the king, you can go to jail for that. You can go to prison.
Right.
Well, in America, you can say something bad about the president, and I still believe that you need to respect the office of the president. President Biden is our president. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with a lot of the things he does, and I'm free to speak against that.
Here. Yep.
Or if I don't agree with the previous president, with President Trump, if I didn't agree with President Trump and what he's doing, I could speak against the president. Mm-hmm. And that's okay to express my opinion. But when you start doing certain things, when you start threatening the president's life,
yes,
and you start doing stuff, you're going to have the Secret Service knocking on your door to find out what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And so our freedoms, and to your point is, where did this begin? Where did this start? So you go back in our history, and you look back and you start looking in the 1950s and the Scopes trial. And the Scopes trial was all about the trials of the evolution and different things like that. And then you have the 1960s, early 1960s, and taking God out of the schools and getting prayer in the schools and taking these things out. And we've talked about this before. I preached on it not too long ago about Hosea chapter 4. Mm-hmm. And when there's no knowledge of God in the land, and there's violence everywhere, bloodshed follows bloodshed. Mm-hmm. That's what we're seeing in America. That's what we're seeing. And ultimately, it's a pushback against authority. And to your point, Gary, you said, where are the parents in this? Mm-hmm. The parents are responsible. The Bible tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that we're to teach our children the precepts of the Lord, and we're to teach them respect. We're to teach them these things. And as they grow up, we're to teach them these things. But when we teach them that, well, you're just here by chance, there is no God, and everything's here by happenstance, then where does morality come from? Who says who's the boss? Who says what the rules are?
Exactly.
Who has the right to make them rules? Because, Gary, if it's just you and me, and there is no supreme authority over us, then who says you're right or I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Who says I can't? Who says I can't take your keys from me and go out there and take your truck?
Right. Yep.
Well, who says that's theft?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's my truck. I think I'm going to take it. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do about it?
Right.
And then we're going to fight about it or whatever, and somebody's going to get hurt and somebody's going to get killed, and I was reading just the other day, or maybe it was this morning. What does God love? And in Jeremiah chapter 9. It says, let not the rich man boast in his riches, let not the mighty man boast in his might, let not, I can't think of the other one. It says right now, strong man boast in his strength, but let him who boasts this, that he understands and knows the Lord. Understands and knows the Lord. What's there to understand about the Lord? It says, in the Lord, understand and know the Lord who loves steadfast love, justice, and righteousness. So what do we have to understand about the Lord? That the Lord loves steadfast love, justice, and righteousness. And that's the important thing. Like and when we don't have, there's no justice. Well, why do we need justice? Because there's righteousness. What does righteousness mean? There's a right and there's a wrong.
That's right.
There is a proper way to do things. And when somebody's in authority, a police officer's in authority, you are to respect that authority. Does that mean everything this police officer does because he or she has a badge? Does that mean everything they do, no matter what, is right and just? No.
No.
They have rules they have to follow. They could step outside the rules. You have to submit to the authority.
Right.
Now, if it's where your life is threatened, that's far extreme example.
That's exactly.
But just obey the law. And where does that start at? It doesn't start with the policeman. It's what about the schools and the teachers? It didn't start there.
Exactly.
You go back to the parents.
Yeah.
But when these kids, there's no laws. They're law to themselves. You can do whatever you want to do. I mean, we've gone to the point in our country where you grew up in the 50s, in the 60s, or actually in the 40s and the 50s, there's right and wrong. There's things you can do, you can't do. We get to the 60s, well, you're free to do whatever. You're free love. No restraints. Who cares about a fidelity prior to marriage and stuff like that?
Exactly.
We just threw that out. Started to reap that. And then we started doing more and more things. And now we've got to the point where a 9-year-old kid could say, a 9-year-old boy could say, I want to be a girl. And we're affirming that?
Yeah. That's...
You can't be.
No.
It's ultimately, it's a pushback against the ultimate authority, which is God.
That's exactly right.
That's where the pushback is against God. And it's something in our country. It's so sad that you had to go through that. And I feel so bad for them officers that work under them situations. But you have to understand that they've got bills to pay.
Yeah.
And if they do something, I mean, we've seen officers in our country recently that are still under investigation and going to court for doing the job that they were called to do.
Yeah.
And people filing lawsuits on them. District attorney's office filing charges on them for doing their job. So it's a tough thing. And Gary, we didn't get to what we were supposed to get to today.
No, we did not. But good discussion.
It was a good discussion.
It really was.
But there's always hope. The Lord, the things are going to be. God is going to make things right.
Yeah. He sure is.
Justice is coming. And so it's so important that, well, what about all these sins? Sins have been paid for on the cross. God sent his son to pay for them, and we see the love, and we see the justice, we see his righteousness. And if you accept that, then God accepts you.
Yeah, I love that.
You are forgiven for all your sins because your sins were paid for on the cross. And he's coming back to make things right.
He sure is.
Thank you, Gary. I really enjoyed this discussion. Thanks for listening in. If you have a topic or question you want to address on Cop Talk, send me an email. You can email suggestions, questions, comments, or complaints to coptalk@therev.fm. That's coptalk@therev.fm. A thought from the good book today: the wise in heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. How appropriate.
So appropriate. Wow.
Thank you for joining us, and help us to make the thin blue line a strong blue line.
Cop Talk is presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and sponsored by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Questions and comments are always welcome by email to coptalk@therev.fm. Listen, follow, leave a review, and share this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or YouTube. And visit thestrongblueline.org to learn how you can be a supporter. Cop Talk is a Rev FM production, produced and edited by Gary Austin. Thank you for joining us on Cop Talk.